Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 18th of March, comes to you from London. And markets mostly up. We saw on Friday the markets up in the US. We see Europe up this morning, and this green here showing us that Asia is up as well. So the dollar just sinking a little bit lower, so still bearish on that short-term chart, but medium and long-term picture still bullish. The euro looking stronger against that weaker dollar. So last week was a pretty good week for the euro. Against the yen, the dollar actually is just holding its strength, so it does suggest that this move in the dollar is going to be short-lived. Sterling sitting at 132.62. Again, another week of political uncertainty, so we'll have to see how sterling reacts to that. We've got targets in both directions, both activated. We've got 1.5% downside, 4% upside. More and more, the market is expecting a deal will get done, I think. Looking at the sterling against the euro, just a little bit weaker here, coming under pressure and testing support there on that short-term chart. Against the Swiss franc, much the same picture. The Aussie dollar, we're seeing sterling quite strong. Bitcoin, little changed, of course. Still, just interestingly, might be just wandering into some bullish territory here on the medium-term chart. But we're seeing really we're flatlining at the moment. So until we can activate some of these upside targets and see multiple upside targets activated, then that will be it. You can see here we've got two very big targets in either direction, neither of which activated on the long-term chart. So calling the future of Bitcoin is pretty difficult at the moment. The S&P 500 was up 0.5% on Friday, so that's looking good. The Nasdaq also in bullish territory, looking stronger, and the Dow also up 0.5%, so looking pretty strong there. The Russell 2000 just struggling a little bit. The broader-based market not recovering as well as the bellwethers. The future this morning, little change on the S&P future. The Nasdaq E-mini up 0.14%, so looks like the market will look fairly flat. It's a bit hard to call at the moment. The FTSE 100 is up 0.5% this morning. Short-term bullish, medium-term bullish. Long-term, we're just into that recovery mode. We do have upside targets of about 7%, 13 and 25% in the long term. We still have to break here, and of course we do need to break this resistance as well. So market's still struggling a little bit, but the US indices are suggesting a recovery is now pretty likely. The FTSE 250 really moving quite sharply as well. We see here on the short-term chart, breaking above the high that we just saw a few weeks ago. So that's or last week. That's looking pretty good now. So the FTSE 250 looking pretty strong. The DAX is down very slightly this morning, and the CAC Quarante also down very slightly this morning. But these charts are now bullish in the medium, short, and long term. So the DAX now really pushing ahead there. The CAC Quarante is actually long term bullish. The DAX has still got work to do. Japan was up just under 0.2% overnight, so that's looking pretty good. Hang Seng was up 1.4%. China was up a further 2.5%. That's starting to look like we're about to activate this upside target, which would indicate we've seen the bottom for Chinese stocks, but it's still a little bit early. We need to just see that upside target activated. The Sensex was little changed, but still looking very bullish, and the Aussie market was up 0.25%. Brent Crude is up 0.2% this morning, still holding its bullish trend. WTI is bucking that trend and down 0.12%, but still looking bullish as well. And we've still got these upside targets here. US nat gas sitting at $2.78, so just back into bearish territory. Just can't break this out of this mold. Gold is still just hanging on to its bullish territory at 1303, but we do have some upside targets developing there. Silver, we're also seeing is struggling as well. US 10-year yields sinking lower, below 2.6% for the first time in a while. We're really now starting to nudge this January low, and it'll be interesting to see whether we see this long-term chart turn bearish. But for the moment, we're seeing downside. We've got an activated downside target of 2.47% for interest rates, so on the 10-year yield. German bonds, not much action here, still short-term bearish. So the bond yield falling in the US, bond prices in Europe still falling as well. Quite an unusual situation. Looking at the world indices, we see it's nearly all green. We just had slight India and Paris are the only two markets really bucking that trend. On Friday in the US, the Dow Jones, the best performer was Intel, up 1.67%. That chart looking pretty good. Boeing recovered 1.5%, so they're starting to shrug off the 737 safety fears. And we saw quite a lot of stocks up. We had about 7 stocks down to the downside, but nothing dramatic on any of these. Looking at the Nasdaq 100, if we just take a look at the bellwethers, Google was actually down. Amazon was up 1.5%. And looking pretty strong, wandering now into the bullish trend there. Apple also recovering up 1.3% and now just coming into bullish territory. So these stocks all starting to look pretty good. Facebook was actually down 2.5%. Their woes last week with their website down probably didn't help matters. The best performer was Ultra Beauty up 8%. Broadcom were up 8% as well. A lot of these stocks now breaking to new highs. Broadcom doing that there. That's a very bullish sign. Tesla was the worst performer, down 5%. They're really struggling at the moment and bearish on both charts. We've underperformed the market on Tesla by about 17% so far this year, so quite a worry there. The Aussie market, the best performer was Fortescue Metals Group, looking very strong now, back into very clearly bullish territory. A shortage of upside targets, that's the only slight concern. We've outperformed the market by nearly 40% this year on Fortescue, so that's quite something. Looking at the downside, we've got Bingo Industries. They were down nearly 5%. That chart's still looking pretty dismal in Oz. China, we saw most stocks were up, only one stock down, so really quite significant there. In India, we had India Oil Corporation as the best performer, up 3.5%. Really, you're starting to motor here. We've got an upside target of 46% and 43% respectively, so that's looking pretty good. Bharat Petroleum up 2.8%, also looking good on that medium-term chart, although it has underperformed the Dow by 20% this year. Taking a look at the downside, we had Lupin Limited down 4.5%. That's really quite scary. That chart looking terrible. We've got some really big downside targets here. We can see here 7, 8%, 10%. Multiple targets really suggest we are going to break this support level and fall lower. So that's not good news for them. Here we see the live prices coming in from Yahoo Finance. Taking a look at Europe this morning, we've got the FTSE 100 index. Rio Tinto is the best performer, up 2.3%, and looking pretty bullish there. We've got multiple upside targets as well. Everaz up 2.1%, so again looking very strong here, making new highs. Just a shortage of upside targets. We have got one lone target here of 60%. In fact, we've got some targets from some time ago around that level, so looks like we're pushing higher. Anglo American also looking very strong. So we're seeing resource stocks, BHP Group, Glencore. We're seeing a lot of these resource stocks really pushing higher, so that's pretty bullish for the market. On the downside, in the FTSE, we've got Paddy Power down 1%, Rightmove down just under 1%. So we are seeing still some poor performances here. Marks and Spencers, Whitbread, Sage are recovering, but down 0.4% as well. And here again, we see the live prices coming in from Yahoo Finance. Looking at the 250. The best performers today, Hunting Group up 5.8%. Not enough really to change the chart, although we are just starting to look like we might recover. They've had a terrible time on the relative over the last several months. Hochschild Limited Mining, they're up 3.6% in line with other resource stocks. On the downside, we've got Clarkson down 4%, so that's not looking great. And the Restaurant Group down 2.8%. That chart also looking pretty terrible. Further downside potential here, 12, 13%. Multiple targets there, so not great. In Europe, just looking at the European top 50 stocks, BNP Paribas, the best performer this morning, up 2%. And starting to look like quite a good recovery here. Banks, generally, we're seeing quite big moves here. And of course, that news of Deutsche and Commerzbank considering a merger coming in. So SocGen, Banco Bilbao, European banks really pushing higher here. On the downside, we have got one bank down. That's ING down 2.6%. So not all banks are rising. Adidas, their woes continue. Although the chart still looks pretty good, they're down 0.75% at the moment. L'Oreal, another chart that looks spectacular, down 0.5% at the moment, so that's quite interesting as well. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.